Good morning. We're a little late in starting our session, but welcome. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here. I thought everybody would be in the session on industry consolidation, and we hear all the sort of, skullduggery goings on in the back rooms of various companies, but you're here. And this is a good use of your time. The title of this program is Think Like a Startup or an Upstart. And we have some very vibrant, creative, innovative people here. We're going to get candid perspectives from them about how they started whichever endeavor it is that they're now working on, although some of them have previous track records as malefactors in the innovation business. So they're going to share their experiences, maybe talk about their failures, and I hope that they will energize us and bring out the creative best in us as we leave here, release our energies to go home and do really interesting new things. Here's the format we're going to follow. I'm going to introduce all three of them very quickly at the outset. Each of our presenters will come up here and spend 5 minutes talking about what it is that they created, anything that they want to say about it. And after that, although we don't have 4 big easy chairs to have a conversation, we will try to do that. We've developed some questions that I will pose to them, and they will answer. And then we hope to have time for Q&A from the floor. So that's the plan from now until 11:15. So our speakers are in the order in which they are in your Charleston program. Easy way to do it. First up is going to be Peter Brantley, who is the Director of Online Strategy at the UC Davis Library. He was previously Director of Digital Development at the New York Public Library. Before that, he was Director of Scholarly Communication at Hypothesis. He's worked at the Internet Archive. He's known, I think, to many of us in this Charleston and other places as a real creative, thoughtful spirit. So Peter will be first. Our second speaker will be Mitch Davis, who is the Chief Business Officer for BiblioLabs. He is a publishing and a media entrepreneur. He was a founder in the year 2000 of BookSurge, which was the world's first integrated global print-on-demand and publishing services company, which was sold to Amazon in 2005 and rebranded at that time. So he's founder and chief business officer of BiblioLabs, the creators of BiblioBoard. Our third speaker may well be known to many of you in your day-to-day library lives. She's Franny Lee. She is GM and VP at ProQuest for SIPX, and she leads the team. She's dedicated to harnessing technology to make library content, copyright, and education interoperate better to make information more accessible. Franny has been at various Charleston conferences and I think has been seen on many of our campuses. So let's start with Peter and then move on, 5 minutes each, and then we'll have an internal conversation, and we will also be very welcoming of anything from the floor. When you do later come have a question or a comment, go up to the mic and just say who you are and what organization or institution you're affiliated with, so we know. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. We are a wonderfully slide-free presentation today, so this is fun for us talking, and hopefully you guys talking with us. That's the whole point of it. So we're all supposed to give a little bit of background. I'm a little bit of a weird fish on the panel, and I'm working at this startup called the University of California currently. And right before that, I was working at another startup called New York Public Library, also another very small institution. But I've had some interesting experiences through my career, and I really approach where I work as if everything now is a startup. And so I just want to quickly recount some of the experiences that I've had in much more focused small companies or startups, and just give a couple words on how that's influenced how I see my work life. I'm basically an IT person. I really did not come out of a library background. It's just that one of my early career positions was at the University of California in San Francisco, where we set up one of the first digital libraries in the early 90s called Red Sage. And that was a really cool project that involved actually a lot of large tech companies, IBM, BiblioLabs, Sun, what then was known as Pac-Bell, and a variety of other services. And in its own way, that was a little bit of a startup. But a lot of the sort of digital library work that I've done has been within very large organizations. And my first real startup experience was something that I was really drawn to in the first dot-com boom. And I think it was because actually I am coming from an IT world, and I was in the Bay Area. And so when you're coming into work every day and all you hear about is a lot of new companies starting, a lot of new ways of doing things, you start getting really interested in what's happening around you. And at the time I was working at the University of California, Berkeley. The University of California system was beginning to have a financial crisis, and then I started fishing around, and I wound up working for a small company called Wrap, which did pricing optimization in a very complicated way, and originally worked with physical components, like server components, and then pivoted into advertising, and then later they were acquired by Microsoft. So at Wrap, I was employee number 15, and in many ways, that was like the most pivotal experience that I've had in my work life. So I'll get back to it with an example of eye-opening for me, moving from sort of traditional large organization for the first time into small. So after Wrap, I went to another university. From that university, I helped lead the Digital Library Federation, and I took it from a half independent to a fully independent status. When I left, it was coming back into clear. Rachel Frick, who's in the audience, led it after I did in that guise. But BLF is also a very small organization. We ran it very quickly, very efficiently, with a very lean staff. And then after that, I worked at the Internet Archive for Brewster Kahle. And Brewster Kahle has created and sold a couple of companies, one of them called Waze, one of them a search company that was later sold to Amazon. And Brewster, who many of you know, is off archiving the web and trying to digitize public literature, open public domain literature, as well as make available some in copyright material for lending, things about his life as always running a startup. So essentially I was back in a startup environment at the Internet Archive. Very small, heavily engineering focused, open floor plans. We had to move quickly. I was responsible for a lot of standards. I helped create an organization called the Open Book Alliance for Brewster that was a consortium, basically an alliance of companies that was contesting the Google book search settlement. And that grouping of companies included Amazon, Yahoo, Microsoft, some library organizations, some publisher organizations, and again, a very dynamic, very fast-moving organization. Later, I joined a company called Hypothesis, which is an open source effort. I think I was Dan Whaley, who's here, and will be speaking later this afternoon, founded that organization, and its effort is to create open source tools for annotating on the web. And at that organization, I was employee number 3, I guess. I'm not sure. But anyway, again, very, very small, nimble organization. I really like these kinds of places, and I like to bring in some of their work ethos and how they operate, even inside larger organizations. And that can be a struggle, but it's very much worthwhile in a lot of different ways. So I hope you'll ask some questions about that. So brief story at Wrap. So I was in charge of IT and systems, and the time came for me to hire someone to help support some of the lower level stuff. In the middle of the dot-com boom, we were running candidates fairly quickly. We wound up with 3 people that we wanted to look at. First person, Ian. Second person, woman who looked really good, thought she was possibly going to be the person lined up for the job. The next, we talked about it, we felt strong about it. We had one more person coming in the next day. We interviewed them. They were good, maybe not quite as good. So later that day, on the third day, I called the woman back up and said, "We really like you. We'd like to give you a job." She said, "Thanks. That's really great. I really like you guys, but I have already accepted a position." So in that 24-hour period, when I thought I was moving really fast, I lost somebody really good. And that taught me something that I will take with me always, which is never wait. Move fast. Take the advantage. And don't wait for something to be perfect. So, there are many kinds of lessons that you take out of a startup environment, but that's one of them. Is do what you can do to move forward in any way possible every day. Don't establish anything to check your movement. Just move. So,
Thank you guys. I'm so happy to be here. I do find it a little ironic that this is running concurrently with a session on the consolidation of the industry. So I'm assuming you guys are less cynical than the group in the other room. So I'm Mitchell Davis. I'm the Chief Business Officer at BiblioLabs. BiblioLabs is our product. And Ann talked a little bit about my background with BookSurge and Amazon. I went to Amazon. I worked in Seattle for a couple of years after that acquisition, helping to integrate BookSurge, and it ended up becoming CreateSpace, which is the sort of self-publishing part of Amazon now. And we also had built the software and the manufacturing systems for the print-on-demand books. So that was one of the main motivations for the acquisition, was they took that technology and put it inside their fulfillment centers around the world. And so now there's 8, 10, 12 million books available that they don't have to keep in inventory. So we sort of, we're a software company that happened to be in the self-publishing business. But one of the stories, I just wrote about this, that one of the things that happened when I was at Amazon was at some point I got asked to write a document on whether Amazon should get more into the library business. And this was before digital, so this would have been mark records, shelf-ready books, Mylar jackets, things like that. And I wrote this 2-page document, and I went to this meeting with this vice president, and he read about a paragraph of it and then set it down and said, "You realize we probably sell more things to libraries than any company in America, and we don't have one person in this building thinking about libraries." And I was like, yowza. Put the document down, never came up again, right? But I think that's a data point that's very important. By just doing things better and faster, I mean, if you go to a receiving area of a library, you see the Amazon boxes strewn everywhere, right? I mean, by just being better and faster, they basically leapfrogged a whole lot of vendors without even trying. So that's sort of the context in which I think libraries are challenged with how startups move and how the media world's moving. So we started this business, same group, same 4 founders. I'm one of the founders. We brought several folks from BookSurge to help us start this. And we originally started in print on demand. We helped the British Library, a bunch of other libraries get some of their historical books into print. We got that business profitable in 2009-ish. And really sat out the first couple of years of digital when the e-ink devices were out, because we were mostly working with historical content and just thought the images were the most interesting thing, not the words inside the book. So when the iPad came out, we decided to take the profits that we were making in the print side of the business and act as our own venture capitalist to invest in this digital platform. And we've been at it. We launched our first product in March of 2013. We've been very lucky that the innovators, the people that are sort of seeing where the library world is going, have become huge customers of us. Massachusetts Library System, Minitex, NC Live. So we've got several state contracts that have been great to try to build a business off of. We just built it. We brought our sales manager from Amazon and some of his best salespeople over in January to build an inside sales team. They're super energetic. They're happy to be working in the library world, and that's going very well. So. Yeah, we're even though I've been at this 3 years now, and I'm more cynical than I was 3 years ago, we're still incredibly optimistic about the potential for how libraries can really be part of the modern mainstream conversation about media, that it's just a place people go to get media. And we want to make the library user experience competitive with every other user experience people have in their lives, because that is the minimum bar now. The minimum bar is to be excellent. And we're building excellent products that we think are way ahead of the market, and finally the market's sort of catching up and getting it. So we're super, super happy to be here, and look forward to the rest of the conversation. So thanks. We're also, I should add real quick, we're also right across our office is literally that PNC building that's across the street from the other art here. And we've got open house the next 2 days. So if anybody wants to come by and check out our digs, meet our people, come see me and get one of these.
I try to tell Mitch that if everybody gets a VIP badge, who's the VIP? So, I mean, I come into this space from a bit of a sideways path too, and I think I'm one of the newer faces on the library scene, and you know, perhaps that makes me the least cynical guest of our panel. I don't know. It depends how you want to read things. So I actually come into this from an ecosystem play, right? I come into this from a copyright background, looking at, you know, coming out of being a musician, figuring out what was and wasn't working in not just the music content space, but as an infrastructure. You know, we have a government system out there, a legal system out there that's trying really hard to incentivize people to make stuff, get those great ideas pulled out of people's heads, shared around the board with everybody to the benefit of society, and to make that as collectively, culturally, valuable as possible. And there's lots of little broken bits in our ecosystem, and how do we find ways to maybe not boil the ocean, but start to use technology to fix some of those little pieces. So my path was actually coming in from being a creator to being a copyright litigator and a copyright policy lawyer, into kind of deep diving into what's going on in education. I went in and did graduate research at Stanford, took a look at, you know, what are the challenges in just one kind of content, just one kind of market. What can we do to apply technology to make these kinds of fixes? And then let's build something. Let's not just talk about this and write papers. Let's build something. Let's put some, you know, really smart computer science students together with some really smart law students, researchers, faculties, and let's do something, right? Take action, build something, take those courses, test them out, and let's see what happens out of that. And what happened out of that was you know, also something I never expected. We started a company. The company spun out of Stanford. The company grew for another 2 years. And the company got picked up by ProQuest this year, which is, you know, what I feel is a really great next phase of life for us. And there's lots of different things we're going to talk about as we get into the questions. But, you know, thinking about where do you need credibility? Where do you need support from your industry? Where do you need funding? Who does that funding come from? All of these kinds of issues have to play into that. And, you know, I think that's the perspective I bring into this. And right now, you know, our challenges, there's lots of different aspects you can think of as you start to grow your idea, your company, your initiative, and whatever it is that you want that startup spark applied to. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's going to be a ton of stuff you need to do. There's going to be lots of different pulls and pushes from the industry. You're going to have to make choices about, this is the path I need to pay attention to, and this is the path that I need to wait for later on. And even now, right now, we are a tiny little startup within a larger corporation. How do we keep that startup spark alive with all these new things, new layers that keep adding and changing? And I think my takeaway point for this is, I think people who want to think like a startup need to embrace that, right? That you can get a lot done. You don't have to flow with the rest of the fish in the pond. I'm terrible at sayings. You can be your own fish, and you can do your own thing. You can be very successful at it. And, you know, you want to pick a mission. You want to be driven by that mission. You want to be curious about how to make that mission grow. You want to be smart about who you get help and who you get money from. And then you want to, you know, even if you have that terrified, that I have no idea what I'm doing and feeling every day, you want to be excited by that and not turned off by that. And I think that's what I want the takeaway to be today from our side.
We emailed in advance with various topics and questions we thought we might want to probe further here in conversation, but maybe we should be polite and say, is there a general topic before we get started that you would like folks to address? We'll have a chance later, but maybe there's kind of a burning topic that's come out of all of these presentations? No? I mean, one of the things I was wondering, and it's not on my list, is most of us are very much organization people. We're inside big organizations. You've seen people who have been in various ways, even if within large organizations, been very free spirits and have had the freedom to act and do things, whether by virtue of their position or something like that. And I think most of us here work for, either a publisher or a vendor or a library. We have a job description. How can that doesn't seem like an environment that facilitates kind of wacky move-on innovation that we've been talking about. Is there hope for us?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of hope for us, but obviously large organizations have their own cultures, and startups tend to have a very different kind of culture. And there are a lot of differences there. One is, roles tend to be much more specified in a large organization than startups, where people are asked to do whatever they can do, basically, at any given moment to move the effort forward. I think there's been a lot of writing about how business cards end up being sort of confusing and meaningless in the startup world, and that's very true. And I think that's one example of the kind of things you can do and actually bring that mindset into a large organization. So we may end up dealing with specific labor issues, but there are a lot of ways of still going out and asking your staff, I know this isn't exactly what you were hired here to do, but do this. You'll learn this way, and we'll have to move the organization forward. So providing vision and a sense of where you're going to go and moving people into different areas is one key thing. I think another couple of quick things are pursue radical transparency. Wherever you are, I think large organizations tend to be operating on a who has a right to know or see, and that's bullshit. The way it needs to be is there any reason for somebody not to see this? Do I have to keep this closed in? And if not, share it, right? Because you're never going to be able to do something better than a whole bunch of you working together. So if I'm asked to deliver a plan for tactics around something, I'm going to open it up to my staff, right? I'm going to launch a Google Doc and say, please help me write this, right? I'm not going to go off and write it thinking that I'm the smartest person in the room. I've got to get my staff helping with that. I'll open it up to the entire library. What do you guys think about that? I look a lot at best practices elsewhere. So, for example, I have a lot of friends at Safari Books Online, and they're really good about writing their internal work practices on their blog. I highly recommend it. So, for example, another example is meeting notes. Just keep them in an active, open, public, scrolling document. Right? Google Docs, one sheet. You don't have a sheet for each week. One sheet. These are the IT minutes. These are the minutes for the acquisitions group. This date. Boom, boom, boom. Right? So again, redact whatever you need to. Otherwise, fully public. Everybody can see it. And install things like Slack. Hopefully, who knows Slack? Right? Slack kicks ass. I have to say, it kicks ass. And it's been, I'm relatively senior in an organization. I can impose Slack on my group. Most startups have some kind of mandatory collaborative sharing space that they expect people to be on, whether it's IRC or Skype or Slack. But establish a presumption that you're going to be reachable through some mechanism, right? It cuts out a hell of a lot of email. It's wide open and it's very public. So those are just some examples, I think, of some of the things that you can do without creating a big organizational issue about it that start opening up a lot of different kinds of conversations.
I'll throw into
I think sometimes you do need to have in parallel a large organizational conversation, or at least support. And I think, what gets lost sometimes is you really want to do this, you believe that this is your mission, but somebody else is going to buy into your mission just the same way, like it doesn't affect their life as much. So you've got to be able to communicate your mission in a way that shows them why this is good for them, and what's in it for them. And if you have that support, you have that touch point with the leadership in your organization to be able to show them, this is what I want to do, and this is why it makes your life easier, and voice it in that way, it does help get the ball rolling a lot faster. Just presenting to them why it's good for you, or it's good for the things that you want to achieve, doesn't necessarily mean those are the same things they want to achieve. And we all want to strive to be in that organization where everybody's goals are the same, but everybody gets a little slice of what they have to do in that world. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to get somebody on your team to help you push this mission forward, be a cheerleader, and support you and bring credibility to your initiative, you've got to show them what's in it for them.
I think I would probably just add that, one of the most important parts of succeeding as an entrepreneur is failing. And, I think organizations are just made up of people, and those people communicate, and they respect each other, they don't respect each other, and they have agendas, they don't have agendas, whatever. But the nature of that communication is what makes things work or not work. And I think at some point when you've, one of the things we say a lot is that we don't try to motivate people. We try to hire motivated people and then not do dumb things to demotivate them. And not everybody, you don't always get it right. You also have to fire people fast in startups if they don't fit, because nobody's perfect at hiring. So that's not fun, but a really integral part of it too. So I think at some point, if you've got the right group of people working, incremental failure just starts to feel like work, right? And you arrive at this place where things are working, and there hasn't been a lot of thrashing around about that because it's a group of people who want to accomplish something together. So definitely that. And that's a top-down thing, the culture comes from the top down, so the more power you have, the more responsibility you have to try to tweak your environment to be conducive to that, I would say.
I just want to quickly plus one that. I think that, if an organization or a group or even a unit can get in the mind frame of, oh, well, shit, that didn't work, let's try something else, everything becomes so much easier. You just don't end up studying to death why it didn't work. Usually it's pretty obvious that you didn't have the development skills or the resources, or you misunderstood a market opportunity, whatever it was. But it's like, okay, what did we learn? Let's head in this other direction. And that's actually easier to do than you think in some cases. And once you start doing it more and more often, it becomes second nature.
Right. Well, we may get to toss out our questions and just talk with the audience. Please introduce yourself and ask them what they think.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks. I'm really excited to be here and to hear you guys. It's a really great topic, and I'm glad it's here. I'm Nikki White. I'm a digital humanities librarian at the University of Iowa, and I work mostly with kind of one-off faculty projects or consolidating kind of trending projects, I guess. And so a lot of these tend to be projects that are trying to present narratives that have maybe not that maybe are not part of a kind of more traditional narrative, I guess, that has been present in scholarly applications before. And so something that we run into a lot is what I call the danger of the default, which is that they're trying to present a new narrative or a new angle on things, and a lot of what I would call the defaults in tools that are available to us uphold a previously or a stronger narrative, a standardized narrative, I guess I would say. So a good example of this might be in mapping projects, for example. The most common projections for maps present, the northern hemisphere being a lot bigger than it is, and the southern hemisphere being smaller. So kind of presenting these sort of north-centric views. And so I want to go back to your earlier comments on always go quickly. We kind of run into the problem of also needing to go thoughtfully and thinking about how each decision we make in technology that seems like a kind of a standard thing or an easy thing where there's a default may be upholding narratives that we're not trying to present. So how do you balance moving quickly with moving thoughtfully?
Because we've made tons of mistakes here too. And I think part of this is, as these guys were saying before, you need to establish that, not just for yourself and your team, that it's okay to do, it's okay to test out a theory, but you also need to establish in the market that, hey, we're just trying this out, we're seeing if it works or not. I think you need to, especially as you start touching customers, one of the things, and like this is what your customers are, your faculty, your students, our customers are, our schools, our institutions. As we start touching customers, we have to be much more thoughtful. And I think this is what you're asking about. What is our minimum viable product? Where is that line? Has that threshold changed from what we were as a fun, move a mile a minute kind of research group to there's actually people depending on this now, and we can't train them this way and have them create expectations here and then switch things on because we're going to. So that minimum viable product question has to be constantly, like what we do at our startup is we have product roadmap reviews, and everybody has to participate in this, from the development people to our product managers, and particularly to the people who touch customers. Right? Everybody's got to come together and say, well, this is what we're developing, this is the minimum viable threshold that we need, and once we hit that threshold and we're all aligned on it, it goes. Right? We don't need to have every bell and whistle out there. We can test out some extra bits as we see what those user behaviors are. When we hit our threshold, we agree on our threshold, and it must go. And maybe it's the right threshold, maybe it's not. We get feedback from our user and try to adopt that as much as we can. But then our users will tell us too. And I think part of this is we operate at such a fast pace. We have we do releases every 2 weeks. Right? We can update our product at such a fast pace that we can't continue to be that responsive. And I don't think every library group out there may have that kind of that turnaround, but that you need to take that turnaround time frame into developing your minimum viable threshold.
I just want to tell a very short story. I'm not an entrepreneur like these people are, but from working in large library settings where everyone wants to be part of the decision. You're in a democratic academic setting where everyone matters, and you have to respect that. I think that gets us into really complex structures of committees and decision making that can be very, very frustrating, because after a year of this kind of process, you realize that the outcome, while slightly better than you might have come up with 12 months before, isn't that much better. So let me just be specific about that and say that at Yale, when we were building our off-campus shelving facility, and we were deciding what books we're building there with its $1 million or $2 million volume capacity, we have working groups and committees and all of that. And we tied ourselves up in knots about, what are we going to put here and what should we do? And, so here's this expensive project, and we're trying to figure out what books to put there. And one of our librarians on a committee said, why don't we just make this easy and say, if we make a mistake, we'll fix it. And that just changed the whole discourse. It became such a liberating thing because we were freed from, writing sections and subsections and whereases and whatever. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Mistakes will be fixed. There's not much you can do in the library, for example, that you can't fix.
And I just want to quickly add on that question. I think part of thinking like a startup is putting the context of what you want to do in the decisions that you're making. So, for example, if it's, to paint an imaginary picture based on little information, but if the work of a scholar or more Southern Hemisphere focused, then yes, you make a decision and you put up a mapping structures that emphasize, Southern perspectives. So I think being open to understanding the context in which you're trying to make decisions and moving forward enables you to move out of the mainstream in ways that can be really rather liberating. And I think that there are lots of different ways of doing that. I think, already there's so many things that I want to do at UC Davis. I don't want to image an artifact at, 600 gig. I just literally want to take a smartphone picture and put that image up on Flickr and then link to those images in an application I'm building, and that's good enough, right? So just be open to what's good enough in the context of what you're trying to achieve, and you'll end up making decisions that are not orthodox.
I'm Jack Montgomery from Western Kentucky University. Been in the business for 30 years and came out of an entrepreneurial environment in marketing and sales. I ran, as I started, I ran slam into what I call the bureaucratic morass that you find in institutions. And as Mitch and I were talking, most of us don't even recognize the organizational culture that surrounds us. We don't. We don't even know we have an organizational culture, but we find that voicing and presenting new ideas has to work through such a system of, I despise the word task force, because it's a, might as well throw it into your idea into a puddle of peanut butter, and it's hardening rapidly. And so I think what you're presenting here this morning is incredibly valuable. It is, what I'm seeing in libraries is that people are being brought in from essentially the outside, entrepreneurial thinkers, then being given license to run roughshod over all the traditional systems so that something can finally get done. And I was wondering if you have any, and I'm seeing this in our own library, where the task force, the idea doesn't matter, get out of the way if you can't help. Now this is really hard for the rest of the organization, which has been taught and conditioned to think in this slow, thoughtful, moving forward, never make a mistake because it will be remembered for the rest of your career kind of atmosphere. And as long as, you know, that what's happening is how do you work with the culture that's already there? How do you help transform rather than just bringing in an outside punch artist that just goes, I don't care what you think, we're going to get this done. Patience. Okay. We're talking about a long transition.
Yeah, I don't, so I have a lot less patience than you do. And I don't think it's really, I wouldn't call it running roughshod. I think it's just opening up the possibility for doing things differently. So, I mean, meeting culture is another example. Task forces are another. For meetings, it's like, why do people, the default meeting is an hour. That's crazy. Make your default meeting 30 minutes. If you need more, you'll fix it, right?
Right.
You know, you don't need to meet every week necessarily, or, you know, you have online alternatives to accomplish, you know, decision-driven.
In my mind, a meeting should never be more than 30 minutes.
Right.
We've had them as long as 9 hours.
Right. So, but it's up, I mean, you can take leadership at many different levels of an organization. You don't need an AUL or a director to say, in my group, we're doing it this way. And I just, you know, encourage people to think about what you really need to get the job done. Like, we think a lot in terms of what is an MVP for a product or a service that we're defining and wanting to release. But there's also an MVP in organizational culture, in a way, right? And so, like, what is it? What do I need within the organization to move us forward? What do I need to make a decision? And I certainly think even, for example, where I work now at UC Davis, which, you know, like I think a lot of mid-sized research organizations have not always kept pace with how things are working on the outside, put it nicely, you know, can be really liberating for senior librarians who suddenly start thinking, oh my God, I can actually do something with these cool materials that otherwise would get sunk in the committee process for the next 2 weeks or a year.
Thank you.
Jack, I'd say too, it really helps to position your idea or whatever it is you're trying to get other people to do as a no-brainer yes. So you got to design yourself in such a way where it causes them no work, brings them all the glory, and really helps them be able to, well, what exactly, get into that kind of mind frame. And that means at the beginning, that might cause you a lot of extra work when it could be faster for them to participate in the early stage. But until you get the momentum going, it's really hard to have people do that blind with you without having some sort of proof of concept. And to get that proof of concept, you often need to do that extra 3 steps that takes you, 40% more time without the help of the partner. But you're the little guy, and you're trying to convince the big guy that the big guy needs to help you to do this. So you gotta carry a lot of burden first.
And I think one of those philosophies, as we call it, the ask for forgiveness, not permission, essentially. Sort of plow ahead and then, oh, whoops, maybe we shouldn't have done that, right? But I'm curious about your experiences, one of the end results of a startup is often to be merged into a much larger organization at some point. So SIPX into ProQuest. And what are some of your experiences at sort of then how your priorities might no longer be set by you or your small group of people, and how you both sort of can keep that startup mentality, but what has to change both for good and ill, essentially, in that transition?
It's every Silicon Valley startup entrepreneur's goal. Like, this is like the hype out there, right? Is you've got your exit strategy, you're going to IPO for $1 gazillion, and Google's going to buy you when you're at this baby stage. Like that's everybody. I mean, I think I was an odd fish in Silicon Valley as well, because I was very mission driven. Yes, sure, it's great to be able to be acquired, and it shows validation for what you're doing. But for us, the decision to move into a larger company was not the exit strategy so much as it was, we need to move into a different stage of growth for this company. We have, and this is something we're going to talk about. This is one of our questions we've been talking about now.
Actually, we're out of time.
Okay.
No, keep going.
Okay.
I'm asking forgiveness to go over.
So for us, it was, you look at who we got money from, right? We were venture capital invested, and we had kind of a board of directors that moved at a venture capital pace, which is one of these uber, ways, multi-billion-dollar in 6 months kind of time frame, which doesn't work for the industry we're in. So for us to move into our next stage of growth, we knew that we had to move into a partner who really understood that could open channels for us, that really understood our mission drive to help expand use of free resources, open resources, library held resources, to lower the cost of education and deliver really high quality educational experiences across the globe. So that really does. You look at your leadership, right? And as you think about where you take that company next, you have to look at who's in charge. We have a serial startup entrepreneur at SIPX that wanted an exit. We have a lot of mission-driven team that wants that growth, and you try to blend the best of all worlds together and make that next SIPX happen. And I think for our company in particular, it was great that we had such a deep university influence that really helped drive forward. Mission is important. Mission must be done, and move that along.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I guess maybe having done book search, having, done an exit and all that sort of stuff, I think one of the things over the last 3 years that has been really surprising to me, is the library industry is dominated by private equity, and private equity by its very nature does not want disruption, does not want innovation. And people put money into private equity specifically for it to generate smooth, predictable returns. And I think in that kind of capital structure, as an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to, I would love for there to be some path other than what you just described, but the way it's set up now, it's that doesn't really exist. And I think that's the thing I would love to, that's why I say patience, right? It's going to take a lot of patience to have that change and to have library culture change where they can take more risks and, not have that. It's just a different currency, in academia. And I think once it's okay to make mistakes, once it's okay to fail, once it's okay to sort of take chances, I think that could change. But right now, as an entrepreneur, it's a pretty discouraging place to work, honestly. It is. Not the goals of libraries, the mission of libraries, the business of libraries is just it's a cynical business.
We're always supposed to end on a high note.
Go team.
And we're supposed to break past these barriers, but I see that people are leaving, and there are other sessions in a few minutes in completely different places. I feel like we've just gotten started, and you missed the question that I didn't get to ask, which is, I've become a fan of Shark Tank, and I was going to ask these people, how would you make a presentation on Shark Tank or its equivalent to convince people that your idea is really worthwhile? So maybe we can continue next year. Franny organizes us and we'll just do it. But meanwhile, thank you very much, and go away and may the force be with you.